to this, the government has been taken to court once again for failing to provide basic rights. Section 27 is headed to court this time around, though, to force the Limpopo Education Department to fix infrastructure at forgotten schools. Back in 2020, there was a government decision to suspend infrastructure projects to repair and renovate schools. 2 years later, the status, of course, remains the same. Section 27 wants the court to review and set that decision aside. So let's now speak to the organization's Julia Chaskalson, who joins me now just to give us the merits of this case. Julia, good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. I think I speak for every South African to say, in 2022, are we still seeing infrastructure, issues when it comes to the Limpopo province and the Department of Basic Education? It's almost a norm. And I don't know why this is, because so many young children are affected when there aren't textbooks, when there isn't proper infrastructure, and this is their basic right.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good morning, Tumelo. And what we're seeing at Section 27 is that we partner with a number of schools in Limpopo who have had serious infrastructure problems for decades now. These are schools where the roof has been blown off by storms. These are schools without electricity. These are schools that have been made by mud bricks. These are schools where the classrooms are cracked and crumbling, which pose a real risk to learners' safety, but also completely interfere with their ability to learn. Now, we know that this has been going on for decades and decades. And in the case of the schools that we work with in Limpopo, many were promised projects to upgrade or repair or renovate their infrastructure. These were projects that had been budgeted for, that had been planned for. But in 2020, to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, the government suspended infrastructure projects, not only in Limpopo, but across the country. And what this means is that overnight, the plans, the budget, and all of the hopes of these schools kind of disappeared into thin air. And what we're saying at Section 27 is that 2 years after the pandemic, we need to reverse that decision to suspend infrastructure projects in Limpopo, because these learners have been waiting for decades. There are schools where learners have spent their entire classroom careers, whether it's their entire primary school time, whether it's their entire secondary school time, and they've seen no changes to the conditions in which they learn. And we think that this is unacceptable.
Yeah, and I understand that you also represent, a couple of schools at Section 27, 4 schools in Limpopo, namely Nzalama Primary School, Dingamanzi Primary School, Chameti Secondary School, Vuma Primary School. Take me through the serious infrastructure problems at these particular schools that you've identified.
So Nzalama Primary School faced a severe storm in 2012. So 10 years ago, the roof was ripped off of a block of classrooms. What this has meant is that those classrooms are completely not usable. They're very dangerous. There's exposed electricity and wiring. There are beams hanging precariously from the ceiling. And learners have described how anxious they feel when they go to school, because they're worried that if another storm comes around, the structure will disintegrate completely. What this has meant is that learners are squeezed into other classrooms because there isn't space for them, or they can't use those broken classrooms. This causes overcrowding, overheating. Learners have described how difficult it is to concentrate when they are squeezed into these other classrooms that are safer. And similar conditions exist at the other schools which we're working with. Vuma Primary School is made from mud bricks, which means that it's incredibly hot, and mud bricks are unlawful because they're so dangerous. And what this means is that learners are squeezed into other classrooms, which interferes with effective learning and teaching. At Dingamanzi Primary School, these issues go all the way back to 2001. They don't have enough classrooms for their enrollment size, which means that there's overcrowding, but they also don't have electricity. And there are large cracks in the walls of the classrooms that do exist at the school. Similar stuff happens at Chameti Secondary School, where a storm has damaged the supporting pillars that hold up classrooms, and there are serious cracks in the walls and the floors, which mean that learners and teachers trip, and there are some classrooms that they just cannot use because they're so dangerous. And what this does to learners' sense of pride in their education, what this does for their sense of commitment to education, the challenges that this poses to educators cannot be understated. And of course, it violates learners' rights to equality, dignity, basic education, and also an environment that is not harmful to their well-being.
Yeah. What legal steps then have you taken? I mean, as Section 24, I mentioned this earlier on before, but I also understand that the government is challenging this.
Yes, so government is going to oppose the matter in court, and we are taking the Department of Basic Education, the Limpopo Department of Education, the government of South Africa, as well as National Treasury to court. And we're asking the court to set aside the decision to suspend the infrastructure projects in 2020. We're also asking the court to force the Limpopo Department to immediately develop a plan to repair and upgrade our schools. But in addition to that, we want systemic relief. We want all of the schools whose projects were suspended during COVID to be identified and plans, including budgets and timeframes, to be developed so that schools don't have to wait for decades more to get the infrastructure that they urgently need. It's very telling that learners are spending their entire schooling careers in environments that are harmful to their well-being, that are dangerous, that do not foster a conducive sense of education. And we're saying that this cannot wait any longer. We can't have decades more where learners are exposed to unsafe schooling environments, and we need to put their education first.
Yeah, and see the hashtag there, Fix the Forgotten Schools, gaining momentum as well on social media. So all South Africans, I mean, this affects all of us. You mentioned the communities bear the brunt of such schools not operating. Parents have to see their children having to learn under trees, for example, being cramped in classrooms when it rains. I mean, children seeing leakages over roofs. So this is a community problem. It's a South Africa problem. And the hashtag Fix the Forgotten Schools, of course, gaining momentum there by Section 27. Julia, if I may, I want to get your comment on this. This is a particularly different issue, but almost similar. In Gauteng, a shortage of space for children in schools. We know that right now it's time for grade 1s and 8s to try and look for spaces, but we understand the Education Department receiving over 700,000 applications for both grades 1 and 8, but the province only saying there's space for just under 340,000. What do you think can be done about this?
So, Tumelo, this is a recurring problem every year when it comes to learner admissions in Gauteng. And we know that Gauteng is the largest population in South Africa, and it's also a growing population. So we believe at Section 27, and this is a constitutional right, that every learner has to be admitted into a school that is, of their parents or of their caregivers choosing. So the fact that every year there's a scramble to get learners into schools and learners are shifted from pillar to post with their families to find a space for them is frankly unacceptable. And it's something that the Gauteng department should be planning for more carefully. There needs to be kind of an expedited infrastructure plan for schools in Gauteng so that learners aren't fighting for spots in classrooms that they have a right to.
And I appreciate you speaking to me this morning. Julia Chaskalson, thank you so much for your time from Section 27, a research and advocacy officer within the organization.